4.
Order, order. Welcome to the Treasury Select Committee on Tuesday, the 10th of February 2025. Today we're looking at the work of the Financial Ombudsman Service, sometimes shortened to the FOS, but we will try and spell that out when we are talking about it today. And I'm pleased to welcome the Chair of the Financial Ombudsman Service, Baroness Manzoor, and James Dipple-Johnstone, who's the Interim Chief Ombudsman at the Financial Ombudsman Service. Now, since we set up this hearing, the Chief Executive of the Financial Ombudsman Service, Abby Thomas, has left the service, and that was announced last Thursday. And I should also highlight the fact that Baroness Manzoor, we learned yesterday afternoon that you will be standing down at the end of your expected term in August. So I think this is the last time that you will be in front of us as Chair of the Financial Ombudsman Service. But hopefully, okay, well, we're tempting us just practically that may be the case, so just to get that on the record. So we've lost 2 people at the head of the Financial Ombudsman Service. Can I ask you, first of all, Baroness Manzoor, you appointed Abby Thomas and she left last Thursday. Why did she leave?
Well, thank you very much first for inviting us to join you this morning to look at the work of the Financial Ombudsman Service. We very much appreciate this.
Mike's very poor, so I'm speaking. If you just lean into the mic a bit, yeah.
Sorry, is that?
Yeah. Yep. Just if you just need, sorry, you just have to lean forward. It's a quirk of the room.
Okay. Thank you very much for allowing us to join you this morning to describe the work that we're undertaking at the Financial Ombudsman Service. Yes, Abby Thomas has stepped down as Chief Executive and Chief Ombudsman. And after working at the Financial Ombudsman Service for 2.5 years, and we wish her well in a new career.
Okay, but it was rather a sudden and unexpected departure. She was slated to appear in front of this committee until last Thursday. What prompted the sudden departure?
Well, it was a mutual agreement. I mean, Abby Thomas decided to step down. It's a mutual agreement, and we wish her well for the future.
Have you signed an agreement with her that you don't talk about this, either of you?
It's a mutual agreement that she decided to step down. I mean, there is nothing further I can add. It was a joint mutual agreement for Abby to leave the service.
So in that mutual agreement, is there a non-disclosure agreement on both sides that will prevent you giving us further information today?
There is no gagging clause. It's an entirely matter for Abby to speak to you, as it is for me to speak to you too today.
That's helpful to know, thank you. So she's left. We've now got Mr. Dipple-Johnstone in place, but as Chief Ombudsman, not Chief Executive. So what is the plan? 1, the interim, and 2, how are you going to be, when and how are you going to be recruiting a new head of the Financial Ombudsman Service? And will it be 1 person or 2?
Well, that's a very good question. We do have 2 people. We have a chief executive, which is Jenny Simmons, who will take on all the enabling functions, which are HR, transformation, IT, and so forth. And of course, James was our deputy chief ombudsman over the last 2.5 years, and he will take on the role in the interim basis as chief ombudsman. And of course, the Chief Ombudsman role is our statutory role, which is in FISMA, and we must have a Chief Ombudsman. We don't have to have a Chief Executive, and indeed there are many other organisations that actually split that role, which is the Chief Executive functions, the enabling functions, and the statutory role on the other hand, which is the Chief Ombudsman. In fact, as you will know, Chair, the Parliamentary and Health Ombudsman Service actually have 2 roles, a Chief Executive role and a Chief Ombudsman role.
So what's the plan going forward? Will you have 2 roles or 1?
Well, as you rightly stated, my second term comes to an end at the end on the 1st of August, where I will step down. I think it's a great opportunity for the new chairman to really look at the organisation as a whole and the roles and responsibility, and it would be a matter for him or her to take forward, I think, as to how and what she would like to do. But in the interim, certainly for the next 6 to 12 months, James and Jenny, we have every confidence, in fact they have been undertaking those roles, as I said, for the last 2.5 years, to move forward, and we have total confidence in them to deliver what we need to deliver.
Okay, well, given that there's not, well, a lot of things that we'll be discussing today, a lot of challenges for the Financial Ombudsman Service, are you concerned that despite those comments, that there will be a feeling that there's a slightly rudderless organisation, that notwithstanding you've been chair for a while now, that because you are going, people tend to look inevitably in these situations to what your successor, yet to be appointed, might do? You have people, well, Mr Dipple-Johnstone, again, no criticism of Mr Dipple-Johnstone, but as an interim, do you think that this will affect the work of the confidence in the Financial Ombudsman Service, both from consumers and businesses?
No, absolutely not at all. As you rightly point out, I'm there till the 1st of August. We have 2 very good people that in terms of leadership. We have a strong leadership team. We have a strong board with a lot of expertise. So no, it's certainly not rudderless. And the fact that I'm here and we made the announcement about me stepping down is testament to the time that we want to take to make sure that the chair appointment is the right appointment for that organisation, and that independent process will start towards the end of this month.
Okay, and just can we be clear about other members of the board? So you're leaving on the 1st of August. Who are the senior board members? Where's the continuity at that level? Because and is the chair, can the chair come from that board, or is that a matter for the process?
Well, it's the process is independent. It'll be advertised publicly, and anyone who wishes to apply for that role are entitled
including from the board. There's no time limits.
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. It's entirely a matter for individuals, as in any other circumstance.
No, where some boards have limits on how long someone who's served on a board can serve. So that
there are limits. Ideally, my personal view is when someone's served 2 terms, really that should be it. But that's my personal view. But other board members are non-executive directors, and it's entirely a matter for them should they wish to apply for the chairman role. And indeed, it's not an appointment that's made by the board itself. This is the Financial Ombudsman Service. The appointment is made by the FCA, who recommend the appointment to the Treasury. So the final appointment will actually be approved and agreed with by the Treasury ministers.
Yeah, okay. And so just to go back to the continuity on your board, where are the continuity candidates, if you like, on the board, so that when your successor is appointed, who will be the senior non-execs?
They're all very experienced in the role that they do. They've held other roles and responsibilities, so absolutely no problem. There isn't one person, but of course we do have a senior independent director, and again it would be a matter for the chairman as to who they think should be there to support them. But quite frankly, I have a very experienced board, and we have a very good governance structure throughout the organisation, and we're a very effective board, as was shown in the 2023 board effectiveness review, which actually said we were outstanding.
Okay. Now, one of the things that we've looked at on this committee, other committees in Parliament have looked at, is the length of time it takes to make public appointments.
Yeah.
You have 2 public appointments to make. One
we have one at the moment.
Well, one to fulfil for your successor, and
Yeah.
then whatever your successor decides to do. But presumably they have to go through a public appointment process. For an interim can't just be made a permanent without a process. So there are 2 big public appointments. 5 months is, I hate to say it, but quite optimistic under the current process for dealing with public appointments. Are you confident that between the FCA will get this across the line in time, or do you think there will be a gap between you leaving and your successor joining?
Well, it's entirely a matter for the FCA, but certainly I have given good time. We will start the process, as I said, at the end of this month, towards the end of this month. It is more than ample time to have 3 to 4 weeks advertising for the role. But of course, I don't leave till the 1st of August, and I would like a decent handover period, and that's what I'm looking forward to ensure that, the new chairman is well versed in the areas that we want to move forward.
And that's very commendable. With Abby Thomas, we only found out on Thursday that she was leaving. When did you know that she was going to be resigning?
Well, as I said, it was a mutual agreement that
But when did you know? Because, you've given 5 months' notice of your departure. Abby Thomas, we only learned on Thursday she was leaving. So was there some more notice than that you had? Obviously, we understand there may be processes behind the scenes before something's announced, but it seems sudden to us. When did you know she was resigning?
Well, when we made the announcement, that was the formal announcement of when she was leaving.
Okay, but when did you find out as chairman of the Financial Ombudsman Service that she was going?
Well, that was that was the announcement that we made on that day, that she would be stepping down, and that was the mutual agreement. So,
yeah, that's not quite answers the question. That was the announcement that was made. When did you, as chair, know that she would be leaving?
Well, I mean,
were you negotiating with her departure then before that date?
But as I've said, there is nothing else, with due respect, Chair, that I can add to what I've already added.
Could you walk us through the day then that she was actually, prior to that announcement? Did you know when you woke up that morning that she would be leaving? Were you in negotiations about what would be put in the press release?
Yes, we were discussing. Yes, of course.
And how long were you discussing it for?
Well, not for very long. I mean,
days, weeks, months, hours.
Well, I think we came to a mutual agreement as to when she was stepping down, and we announced that on the day that we announced it. So that was it. But of course, there were discussions before that regarding the press announcement.
Okay. Did you have any concerns about her performance as chief executive, chief ombudsman of FOS?
I think I've kind of explored that as much as I can with you, which I've said, we mutually agreed that Abby would step down, and we wish her well.
Okay, well, I'll come back. I'm just going to bring in John Grady briefly and then to Mr. Glenn.
Question. The normal course in these events would be that you would sign some form of compromise agreement, and that would include the agreed statement about the departure. When was that compromise agreement agreed? Was it last Friday or was it before?
I've already stated there's nothing else I can add to what I've always I've said, which is that it was mutually agreed. Abby stepped down, and we mutually agreed that she was stepping down, and we made the announcement. I mean, there is nothing else. I'm very happy to talk about the performance of the organisation, as the chair has just mentioned. Happy to do that.
We're going around in circles a bit here. I mean,
we are actually, but there is nothing else I can add. It would be unfair to talk about.
But you're in front of a parliamentary committee.
Well, no.
You're here to answer the questions.
Well,
with respect.
I think I've answered the question.
Well, okay. Did you get on with Abby at all? I mean, was it?
Yeah, I mean, the relationships at the board with all board members and the executive team are very constructive, very supportive and helpful. And as I said, we have an experienced board, and the decisions we make are usually unanimous. But of course, I have James who can maybe attest to that in terms of relationships with.
Well. Okay. No, we actually want to asking you questions, if I may, Baroness Manzoor. So. But mutual agreements start somewhere. It can get mutual when it becomes apparent that there is no other option. So who proposed originally that there would be a parting of company between Abby Thomas and the Financial Ombudsman Service?
It was a mutually agreed.
Well, someone must have suggested it first. Did she say, I want to go, or did you say, I want you to go?
Abby has stepped down from her role, and we agreed a mutual agreement, and she stepped down from her role. We wish her well in her new endeavours.
And were you happy with her performance in that role?
It would be wrong to talk about performance and issues like that. As I've already indicated, Abby stepped down from her role, and we wish her well. I mean, there is nothing else I can add to that.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Mr. John Glenn, MP.
Great. I'm not going to pursue this same line again because you've said what you've said, but when you were appointed, I was involved in that appointment, as you know, and you have a long record of public service in similar roles in other organisations, and people will draw their own conclusions of 2 short tenures of chief executives. But to be constructive looking forward, could you set out what you see as the qualities needed in Abby Thomas's successor that actually the Ombudsman Service absolutely requires at this time, in as much detail as you can?
Yes, no, thank you very much. I don't, and it's lovely to see you at the other side of the table. I think moving forward again, it's not really a matter for me. It would be more for.
But you've had the most experience.
No.
Over 6
I agree.
years.
I was going to answer that,
Sorry.
and I think obviously the new chairman will have his or her
absolutely.
ideas.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I think it's really important in a chief ombudsman, because that is a statutory role. That is the focus that there should be, which is on the statutory role. Which is really understanding casework, understanding end-to-end processes, understanding how we transform the organisation, playing a key part in looking at consumer protections, being independent and impartial in decision-making, and ensuring we have a culture within the Ombudsman Service that has clear and sound foundations from which to build up from. We have regional hubs, and I think it's really important that we continue to develop those at pace, and I think to deal with issues at pace is absolutely imperative.
Okay, can I, Chair, with your permission, move into the next?
Well, I was going to come back again, because Baroness Manzoor, my brain is fizzing here with every time we've asked a question about why Abby Thomas is leaving, you just say it's a mutual agreement. But you're heading up. We're here to discuss the performance of the Financial Ombudsman Service. The departure of a senior person is significant. These things, we've all been around the block. They don't just happen. Even a line about a personal reason or something, there might be sometimes reasons that aren't in the public domain for good reason. But you, as chair, are responsible for making sure that the Financial Ombudsman Service delivers. Were you concerned about performance? Is that one? What was the reason behind it? And can you just please be specific about the timetable? Was this being discussed for weeks? Was it something that just happened? Was there a catastrophic event that led to this? Could you give us, please, some more information? You are here in Parliament to answer our questions.
No, and I hope I'm trying my best to answer those questions.
But you have to, with respect, you haven't answered the questions.
Well, I think I've answered to the fact that. Abby decided to step down. It was a mutual agreement.
Okay. Can you just walk us through at a point? Did you call her in for a meeting, or did she come to you and say, "I want to go"?
Well, I mean, I have weekly meetings and twice meetings every week. With different people, but particularly with the chief executive and chief ombudsman. And that's done on a regular basis. But that's not abnormal. That's normal within the organisation.
So at any of those meetings, when you were discussing performance, did you find that you were no longer, it wasn't a working relationship that could continue, if I put it in very delicate terms?
Well, look, throughout the organisation, we have high standards at the Financial Ombudsman Service. We have high standards in terms of what the board expectations are. And I think, all I can say is that Abby decided to step down, and it was a mutual agreement.
But can I just follow up here then? When you came into position, 2 years after that, Caroline Wayman left. And a matter of 2.5 years later, the next chief executive left. People looking at this organisation from outside will say, sometimes there's somebody who's not meeting the grade, just moves on, find a replacement. But in such a short interval of time, for such a prominent role, somebody who has enormous professional experience at Accenture and other places, it does seem odd. And I accept, we understand, we know how it's difficult to get to the heart of this, but we're trying to get to the heart of this for the public who want to understand what's going wrong.
Yeah.
With the best will in the world, unless we can hear a bit more, we're going to struggle to draw reasonable conclusions.
Well, I think, you mentioned the Caroline Wayman. Caroline Wayman worked with the organisation for over 20 years.
Yeah, but not very long in the chief executive role.
And she was chief executive, chief ombudsman for 7 years. And she moved on to a senior role elsewhere in a management consultancy company. I mean, Abby Thomas has been with the organisation for 2.5 years, and we have agreed with mutual agreement between Abby and ourselves that she would move on. She has stepped down, and she will move on to other senior roles, and we wish her the very best in her career.
But she stepped down. I mean, it's a big thing for someone to step down mid-job. You don't get a severance pay if you just step down. So that sounds like she didn't go of her own volition, that she was encouraged to leave. Am I right in drawing that? Because as Mr. Glenn says, we're going to be having to draw conclusions from what you're telling us. So,
well, it was a mutual. She stepped down, and that was a mutual agreement.
So she has no severance pay.
Well, any remuneration payments that are made, etc., are put in our annual accounts, and that's where. Okay. They are highlighted. It's not. They're very transparent. Very.
If people leave their own volition, if you just resign from a job, you don't get a severance pay. You get a severance pay if there are other reasons. You've mentioned that you're here and you want to defend the high standards of the Financial Ombudsman Service. Did Abby Thomas measure up to the high standards that you expect of the service?
I mean, do you want to talk about the performance of the Financial Ombudsman Service role? Because it's really unfair to talk about an individual.
Well, I don't
think I can say any more.
Well, I'm trying different ways of asking
the individual
Baroness
as well.
Manzoor, I'm trying different ways of asking the same question. I don't want to get heavy about what contempt of Parliament, but you are here to answer questions to Parliament. We just want to know whether, basically, was she pushed or did she jump?
Well, it was a mutual agreement. She stepped down from the role.
Harriet Baldwin, do you want to?
Well, I was going to broaden this to the discussion that the Chancellor is clearly having with regulators at the moment about coming up with ways to break down barriers to growth. And I just wanted to clarify for the record whether the Financial Ombudsman Service is one of the 17 regulators that's having the regular conversations with the Chancellor about the plans to take forward those removal of those barriers to growth.
I think the removal of barriers to growth and increasing competitiveness is very important.
Yes, so my question was the Financial Ombudsman Service included in those meetings with the Chancellor?
But we're not a regulator.
No, so therefore
we're not included.
I'm just looking for a yes, no.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you were not in one of the regulators that was. You're not a regulator. You were not involved in those meetings.
That's correct.
And you've not been asked to come up with plans for growth or removing barriers to growth for the regulator, for the Chancellor.
Well, the Chancellor has call for input, and we have a joint call for input that we can discuss, which is actually looking at improving and minimising potential regulation and looking at redress, and that's overall within the regulatory family, and we are part of that. But directly being called into the Chancellor to have discussions with her, no. But of course we have met with the Economic Treasury Secretary, the previous one, Chida Sadiq, to have a discussion with her.
So would the committee be right in surmising that one of the areas of tension around the Chief Executive's role was perhaps to do with these plans?
No, absolutely not.
No, okay.
And can I just ask you, you've mentioned that any payments would appear in the annual report and accounts. That's about 18 months away. Any chance that you could tell us now rather than waiting for the annual report and accounts, if it's going to be in the public domain and you're in Parliament now answering questions to Parliament?
Well, they will be in the public domain in due course, as the normal way of course.
With respect, Baroness Manzoor, I spent a decade asking questions like this, and it is actually it is expected, and it is the rules, that if we're asked a question about money, taxpayers' money that's being spent, you do need to tell this committee. I mean, we can wait 18 months, but actually now you're in front of us, we're asking a direct question, and it would be very helpful if you could, if you know there's an amount of money that's going to appear in the accounts, you really do need to tell us now that we're asking.
Just to be very clear, we're not talking about taxpayers' money. This isn't.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
It isn't taxpayers'
It is funded
money.
by the industries. Okay.
It's not public money.
Yeah. Sorry, forgive me. That's my old hat tripping in. But it is funded. It isn't. It is other people's money.
But
nevertheless.
just to be clear, it is. The Financial Ombudsman Service is funded by a levy and polluter pays.
But therefore, it's other people's money. The levy from industry. So it is those businesses that are paying. So can you tell us what's been... is it money by legislation?
There's no...
But we legislate that there's a levy, don't we, from Parliament?
So in terms of the levy that is paid by businesses,
my point is, it's other people's money. The levy is paying for this, so they would want to know, and I'm asking the question.
Yeah, but
what will appear if it's going to appear in the accounts? That's a public document. So you're in front of Parliament to answer questions. You have to answer the questions we ask. If there is an amount of money appearing in the accounts, could you please tell us what it is now? There is no reason for you not to tell us now.
Well, I couldn't tell you now because I don't quite know exactly what what will be in the accounts, and so therefore
so
it's
you
not
don't
public.
know what the
well, not at the moment, because obviously we have to go through auditors.
Not the whole accounts. We're asking about this particular thing, Mr. Grady.
But
may I say, Baroness Manzoor, if I may interrupt. You've reached a mutual agreement, but you can't say when the agreement was agreed.
May I
finish?
Yes.
Would you please give me leave to finish, Baroness Manzoor? Now, in the ordinary course, when you reach an agreement in any large organisation, you consider and identify and crystallise at the time what the likely disclosure requirements are. So I struggle with the notion that you wouldn't know whether you've got to disclose this in your accounts or not.
No, that's not what I said, with due respect. What I said is that any money through our accounts will be disclosed in those accounts in the normal process. It'll be open and
then
transparent.
I struggle, may I say, because you must have reached a view as an organisation as to what you're likely to have to disclose, why you can't disclose this to this committee.
Well,
I'm lost.
You're asking me a question regarding Abby Thomas, and I've answered the question that we reached a mutual agreement, and Abby decided to step down, and that was a mutual agreement. There is nothing. I mean, I
negotiated any settlement last week. You would, as chair, would have signed that off. You was a mutual agreement. So you can tell us that settlement figure now. You are in front of Parliament. You are actually obliged to ask questions. It's a contempt of Parliament not to. I don't want to get heavy on the rules. I just thought you would be aware
I think I know the rules.
Yes, indeed.
So
I'm surprised that you can't just answer the question.
And I'm not in contempt of Parliament. I would say.
No, I didn't say that you were. I said that if you don't answer the questions,
yeah,
you're in
but
contempt of
I'm
Parliament.
answering the question, and the question is that Abby Thomas has stepped down. It was a mutual agreement.
The simple question is, was there a severance payment?
And we made the announcement on the day that was reached, and that was very clear, and that announcement was made on the same day. Any other discussions prior to that are a matter between the individuals concerned.
So you've just told. So it's a private matter, but it's going to be in the accounts.
No. You asked about
severance payment, but I asked about the severance payment. You would have signed that
I've said
last
it
week.
will be in the accounts.
Yes.
I've been very clear that it's not public money. It's not public money. It's not. It will be in the accounts, and it will be very clear. There is nothing else. I mean, seriously, if you're wanting to better understand the work of the Financial Ombudsman Service,
which Baroness Manzoor, we would like to get into that more detail. If we can answer these questions.
But I think
one last go from Rachel Blake MP, please, because we're just here to get answers. Yeah. Sorry, Harriet Baldwin.
But what I'm hearing is that there is a severance payment. You're just not prepared to tell Parliament today what it is. But I am taking away from this discussion that there is a severance payment.
Do you want to answer that? Is there?
Is
a question?
I
Is there a severance payment?
Abby Thomas has stepped down, and it was with
a severance payment, clearly.
And anything else to do with our accounts will appear in accounts in the due.
So there's a severance
account.
Okay, thank you. Rachel Blake, and then very quick ones.
Correctly, that the agreement was made on the same day that it was announced. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, there were prior discussions, rightly but yes, it was made on the same day. Yes,
the agreement was made on the same day.
Yes.
Okay, last one.
That's what I heard.
Okay, we just want to clear when.
Yes,
I'm very surprised.
Mr. Coughlin.
Thank you, Baroness Manzoor. So I assume your financial year end is the 31st of March.
Sorry.
I assume your financial year end is the 31st of March.
Yes, that's correct.
I.e., you're not very far off your auditors coming in anyway. So is it possible to write to the committee about the exact amount, if any, that you disclosed, that you will be disclosing in your accounts in any severance payment, given that your audit's only, 2 months away?
If you could write formally to us.
Yes, I'm happy to write on any matters that the committee wishes for us
But
to
given,
address.
I understand any severance payment, that what the exact amount may be now might be slightly different to what's disclosed in the accounts, given the audit process and accounting standards. but given you have your auditors coming in soon, perhaps you can run that by your auditor to ensure that...
I think we can, or just to give us the figure,
If
if you could write to us formally about this, we might get an answer.
If I am able to write in those terms, I will certainly do so.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, we do have powers to call for people, persons, and papers, persons, and records. So we will do. If we will do that. We're just giving you notification. Dame Siobhan, last one, and then I'll move on to Mr.
You
Kent.
said our inquiry today is into the work of the Financial Ombudsman. So we get from what you've told us so far about your chief executive leaving that it wasn't a question of personal competence or anything, and I understand how it's hard to talk about somebody else, and given that reputation is all. So would it, given the problems that, or the issues you're going to face as a service, many people have suggested it might be a difference of opinion about the fee for the claims management companies, and they've portrayed it as Ms Thomas was opposed to a fee or a high fee, while you felt that the fee of £250 would be correct. Is that a fair assessment?
I think the assessment is that the board receives papers on any new initiatives that we want to take forward. We sit with our executive leadership team and have very clear, constructive discussions. Some of them, that can be. They're very proactive, they're supportive, and they can be challenging as well. I think the CMC's charging. The reality is it's very important. Again, I go back to the high standards and experience board that we have. It's very important that we look at fairness, both in terms of consumer protections for the consumer, as well as fairness in the systems in terms of our charging. CMCs, claims management companies, and legally represented professionals are people who charge consumers either 30 or 40% of any awards that they are awarded. And of course, we're free at the point of for any consumer to come to us. And I think, you will have seen that we have made the announcement that we will be charging from the 1st of April. And we will, every year, as part of our budget and consultation, we will consult on the level and any other changes we may wish to see as an organisation.
Sorry to interrupt, but that's a fundamental change and a very big decision to make because of the impact it will have on people and who wish to make claims and often are not very able to do it, so use a claim management organisation, and it is very fundamental. So my question is, was that the source of difference between you and maybe the board and Miss Thomas?
No.
It wasn't the issue.
Unanimous decision, where we made the final decision, unanimous. And James, I don't know if you would want to add to.
It was about whether it was a decision. This was about the Abby Thomas situation. So thank you very much, Dame Siobhan. We're now going to move on, and we do want to get into the work of the Financial Ombudsman Services to Mr. John Glenn MP.
Can we turn to the caseloads at the FOS? And obviously, the figures seem to indicate a massive increase of 40% up in the first half of 24 as compared to the first half of 2023. As we sort of get into the organisation, what's going on, could you describe to us what you think is happening in terms of the caseload and where these significant increases in volumes are, and give us your take on what that means for the organisation in terms of processing so many increased volume of complaints.
If I just stick the high level and then I'll hand over to James, if I may. I think we have to remember that within that period, certainly from April to December, I think the numbers are around 47% or therefore are from claims management cases and related to the many of them to the Motor Finance Commission, and also to the higher in consumer credit area as well. So there is that impact, of course, but nevertheless, I think, to look at the service standards within that, it goes back to one of the things that we want to ensure as a board, and we're very clear about, is that we try and clear the older cases that within our remit, and we made significant progress on that, but a lot more work to do. The other thing is we want to ensure that the turnaround time, the timeliness of cases is much better. And at the moment, I think it'd be around 83% of cases will be dealt within 6 months, and around 44% of cases will be dealt with within 3 months. The board's expectations are much higher. We would like 90% of those cases to be dealt with within 3 months. And certainly going forward, many more cases between 27, 28, that we have the same timeline for delivery of only having 2 months, which is what the business is allowed. And this is really important. And I just have to stress that despite all this significant number of cases that we're getting from CMCs, largely, we have managed to remain the quality of our decision-making and the consistency of our decision-making remains high. But from a board's perspective, I would say that in terms of looking at technology and IT and artificial intelligence, there is much further to do, and we would like to see a step change in further improvements in that area. But
sorry,
James,
Baroness Manzoor, before you turn to your colleague, can I just ask you to reflect on what's driving this increase? There's a sort of it's a massive increase. I think any organisation dealing with such a massive increase in short time frame is going to struggle. You've helpfully given us the figures on processing times, but what is driving it? Is it heightened consumer awareness, or are firms behaving in differently to previously? Give us your take as the chairman of what's going on.
Well, I think firms, the consumers that come to us because consumers come to us, and there are 2 ways that they can come to us. And one is that they come directly to us, and the vast majority do, or they can come through claims management companies. Now, those claims management companies, quite frankly, we have some very good ones and have very good behaviours. There are many more, sadly, that have poor behaviours, and so they are looking at maybe regulatory gaps, or maybe highlights of reviews maybe that the Financial Conduct Authority have undertaken, for instance, the motor car finance cases. The FCA undertook a review in 2019, and in 2021 they banned the practices they found while they undertook that review. And of course, CMCs are seeing a window of opportunity, and they're exploiting perhaps a loop that should have been closed at that time, and we are seeing the number of cases coming to us directly as a result of that.
What I'm trying to get at is that the demand for your service is sort of generated by heightened consumer awareness, and also regulate the FCA's activities, sometimes of historic issues.
Exactly.
Must be very difficult to predict how to respond when you've got such sort of moving factors influencing the inputs.
I think there has to be much greater clarity around the policy decisions upstream. I think there needs to be much greater clarity in terms of what expectations are from the businesses, and then must be much greater clarity in the way then that we are left to interpret the rules that are in place. But to give you some assurance that when you look at our uphold rates generally, they haven't moved much despite the influx of cases. So that's not necessarily saying that businesses' behaviour or their service has disintegrated. It seems to have remained steady. I mean, 1 in 3 is still not a great track record, but nevertheless.
Because what I'm getting at is if the FCA do a retrospective review of a certain commission payments mechanism or whatever, but leave the fix, if you like, or the ambiguous, begs the question, how do you resolve these matters plainly and clearly and unambiguously if you've got an ambiguity in terms of the outcome of that evaluation? Is that a reasonable inference of what's going on here?
I think that's fair and reasonable. I think there needs to be clarity of the rules and regulations.
More than you've got at the moment.
I think that's one of the issues for call for input, which is to look at redress across the whole system. But I think it's right when you've got principle-based regulation, then that does afford some issues, both for businesses and indeed for ourselves.
Well, ambiguity, which is difficult for business and consumers.
Well, we have a fair and reasonable test at the Financial Ombudsman Service, and so therefore we are looking at the evidence that's put before the Ombudsman Service to say, what it is that the business have done and what are the documentation or evidence that the consumer is providing. We're not a consumer champion and we're not a business champion. We act totally with impartiality and independence, but it's really important that there is clarity from government, from the FCA to businesses, so that we, and we're right at the end of the scale, we're not at the forefront of it, that we are not having to interpret maybe the rules and guidances that are being given to others.
Thank you, Baroness Manzoor. Did you want to bring in?
Yes, I was just going to say, to those points, there are probably three drivers of the demand that we're seeing across the service. As you rightly identify, a key part of that has been the Car Commission cases, and they break down into two main pots. The first are the cases that we were looking at, which were complaints about discretionary commission agreements post the FCA's ban. So it was banned in 2021, but we saw complaints in the preceding years come through. Yeah. So those were the cases that we were looking at, and they were part of the first pause that the FCA put in place. There was then a Court of Appeal case that was brought by some representatives, which looked at non-DCA models. They won their case, and that generated another surge of demand of those cases. And then we have a third, smaller category of cases, but growing, which is people who don't know whether they fall into one or the other category, and so therefore aren't caught by the pause, but they're coming through to us and we're having to work those. We're also seeing rises in demand in affordability of consumer credit loan cases. That's about a 30% year-on-year drive there. And sadly, about a 30% year-on-year increase on our fraud and scams work due to the increased level of frauds, scams, the complexity that we're seeing there. So those three pockets of our work are what's really driving the numbers through. But the biggest of those is the first one that you identified.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you. I think that gives us the framework.
With the change, we're going to come into this in more detail. Do you think we're going to see a drop-off?
I would very much hope that the no-fault scheme, we would see a drop-off coming through. We haven't seen many cases about the drop-off, probably about 100 in terms of the new PSR rules. But what we are still seeing is...
since the new rules came in, you've only had 100?
Of complaints about that kind of APP fraud covered by the new rules. We're still seeing a lot of cases under the old system, but also failed investment cases.
Okay, because you've got a lag, a tail. Okay, well, we'll come to
the volume and the complexity grows, so that's a challenge.
Mr. Glenn?
No.
Okay, thank you very much. Harriet Baldwin, MP.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to dig a bit deeper into this car finance issue, because car finance is obviously such a significant part of the economy, so significant for consumers. And just help me out here in terms of your point of view, and that was helpful in terms of hearing that there was quite a lot of caseload in this area before the FCA decided to set some clearer rules. But this Court of Appeal case, why did consumers feel they needed to go via the Court of Appeal rather than via the Ombudsman? May I ask the acting Chief Ombudsman that question?
Yes, I can give you a guess as to their motivation. Obviously they will speak for themselves, but we had been looking at complaints about discretionary commission agreements, the first type that we looked at, and we had upheld those, and there'd been an FCA pause. Separately, some representatives had identified this other pocket of cases, and they'd gone directly to the court. We are an alternative to the courts, but they'd chosen to advance their cases through the courts. Obviously, the Courts of Appeal judgment came back on the, let me get the names right, Johnson, Wrench and Hopcroft cases, which went through, and upheld those points, and then representatives brought more cases through, and then they started coming through to us as well. under our jurisdiction, we have an obligation both to take into account the relevant standards and regulatory codes, but also the views of the courts. So it's not unusual if the court decides something that we then see complaints coming through about that particular issue.
And so what impact with the current freeze is that having on your caseload?
So it means that we have cases that arrive with us, and we have to do work on them, but until the courts clarify the position,
right,
we're not able to resolve those cases.
So they're in a pending tray, as it
So
were.
they're pending, but what we've learned from previous cases, some of which we might come on to touch on other lines of questioning, is we still want to work those cases up as much as possible so that when the court clarifies the position, we can then resolve those cases as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So I have a team of colleagues who are gathering the information, identifying what kind of agreement is in place, putting the material together, ready so we can determine those cases when the courts have clarified the position.
So in terms of the report that we've read about the Treasury now putting in a submission to the court in the appeals process, what's the view of the Ombudsman Service on that, Baroness Manzoor?
Entirely a matter for the Treasury. It's not for us to comment on.
Okay, so you've got no comment at all on that.
Well, as I said, it's a matter for the Treasury, and like any legal process, it is their choice. But as far as we're concerned, I think my concerns very much, and the board's concerns, are that there is consumer detriment while we have this significant pause, not only as a result of the court that came later, but we are on significant pause till December this year, and so some of those consumers have been waiting a very long time to have the outcome of their case, and I think the sooner that these issues can be dealt with, the better it is. It's not in anyone's interest for them to be delayed.
And it's also not in any consumer's interest that the whole car finance industry shuts down on them and they're not able to access car finance. So
Absolutely.
Can you give me your views in terms of where the balance needs to be struck in terms of what we hear reported at the Treasury's points to the court about the economic impact, as we understand it, and the consumers who've suffered harm in the past?
I think it goes back to the point that was made by Mr. Glenn, which is really ensuring that the balance between regulation and consumer protection is fair, and the regulation is effective. And I think we need to ensure that regulation is very clear, and where there are issues that are picked up, that those are actually dealt with very quickly, so we know we can only react to the rules and regulations that are in place. And so therefore, when there are complaints, then they're dealt with speedily. And indeed, if there are scheme rules to be made, that they are made speedily. Now, we don't make any scheme rules, so this sits with the Financial Conduct Authority. They could choose to do so, and in fact, I think that they're considering. Maybe it's one of their considerations. I'm not party to that, but to look at how they could make a settlement, a bit like the steel miners cases that were available, where they instigated some scheme rules so that we didn't receive complaints to us directly.
And you mentioned that you'd had a meeting with the previous Economic Secretary, and is that the only meeting you've had with the Treasury about this issue?
Well, we, working level, James meets very regularly with Treasury officials
and
on
at
a regular
ministerial
basis.
level?
At a ministerial level, no, I've not had another meeting other than that meeting, because of course there was that change, and the new minister is just recently in place. But yes, I would hope to have that meeting. I think my experience of meeting with ministers has been a very positive one. It's very open, it's very transparent in terms of the changes that need to be made, and I think there are significant changes that do need to be made in the regulatory landscape.
And what changes are you in your organisation going to deliver with respect to these conversations?
Well, we mentioned the call for input, which is a joint consultation that has gone out from the FCA and ourselves, which is saying, well, to anyone, including this committee, if you have suggestions and there are areas you think that we could improve in the wider regulatory family, indeed the Financial Ombudsman Service, I very much welcome those, so please send them in. But I think, you know, my view is FSMA, there are some good things in FSMA, but looking at the Ombudsman Service itself, personally, again, it's a matter for the new chairman, but one of the things that we were looking at is a one-stage process of complaint handling, so it's much easier, much simpler. I think we need to be able to have very clear dismissal powers so we can dismiss cases that are not appropriate to come to the Ombudsman Service. They're not as clear as they could be. I think it's very important that we have, where there are mass claims, that information is shared very quickly and is dealt with very quickly with the appropriate regulators, and where we're seeing any uptake of those cases, we are sharing those insights very quickly.
And
There's
can you
them, yeah.
rule out for the record that the departure of Abby Thomas had anything to do with this car finance issue?
Absolutely, I can rule that out, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dame Harriet. Bobby Dean MP.
Thank you. Perhaps a question for Mr Dipple-Johnstone. Could you give us a sense of the scale of the motor finance claims? I've met with a legal firm who tell me that they're representing up to 2,000 constituents, and he expects the number of people that could claim is much higher. If you just add that up across the country, is it going to be bigger than PPI if upheld, if the current claim is upheld?
So I can give you some sense of the cases that we've seen. We obviously hear a range of different views from representatives and others as to how many cases they may have waiting in the wings. The FCA would be able to give you a lot of detail about what is paused with firms, but certainly we've got over 60,000 cases with us relating to Motor Finance Commission. So it is quite a significant block of work, which is why we've put a team onto it, not just to leave it there until the courts decide what they're going to decide, but to start to prepare it so we can move it through quickly, because we'll have to be dealing with that next year and the year after.
And given that sense that you've got from your case numbers, do you think that compares with the scale of mass redress of the PPI?
So obviously the service saw a lot more during PPI, but there was a wider selling of that kind of product. So I wouldn't like to guess in terms of what we saw, and because I wasn't with the service at that time, but what colleagues tell me is it was a slow burn, then it increased quite dramatically, and then the service cleared the work through. So what we've tried to do is learn from that event, prepare our ground, make sure we've got the training in place, we can scale up our resources quickly, we understand the product, we've got the legal advice, we've got the digital platforms to deal with the cases, so that if they do come through to us, we're able to scale up quickly so we can provide the best service we can to consumers.
And I guess the scale of it is at the heart of the concerns that the Treasury has. They're talking about the impact on the economy. I know that you can't judge whether or not what the Treasury's view is, but is there precedent for this? The Treasury getting involved because of a mass redress event potentially impacting the economy overall? Can we think of other occasions where the Treasury have done this?
Well, I mean, I don't know is the answer. Truthfully, I don't know. But of course, if it's important, I mean, we have to think about the ecosystem of the financial services. And I think Dame Baldwin raised a very important point, which is, you know, we have to look at the impact of this, and we mustn't take it as read that every case that comes to us, or indeed is elsewhere, has merit. That's the other issue. So, and that was the distinction that James was making.
I guess the point I want to get to is it really the Ombudsman's responsibility to think about the impact on the motor finance industry? Shouldn't your focus just be about justice and whether or not there is something to be redressed? I mean, we're talking about potential collusion between, you know, lenders and sellers on a huge scale, and whether or not that's going to therefore impact that industry. Shouldn't the Ombudsman's concern just be whether or not that collusion took place and whether there should be redress for it?
So we absolutely look at each case on its merits and the detail of the case, but what we do is, through processes such as this, but also our broader engagement, is we share the volume of what we're seeing, because we recognise there are wider economic impacts, and we have a duty to share that information with the regulator and others so they can see what's coming through. The call for input is absolutely about how quickly we can identify these coming through the system, so that consideration can be given to a redress scheme without the need for everything to be escalated through the complaints process through to the Ombudsman. But at every single case, we are absolutely looking at that individual circumstances, those fact patterns, what's right for that consumer and that relationship.
Yeah, I think we're going to come back to the reforms later, so I'll pass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dean. John Grady, MP.
You mentioned, Mr. Dipple-Johnstone, use of AI. Is AI being used in dealing with these cases?
Not in deciding the cases. I will disclose I'm a former Deputy Information Commissioner, so I'll put my cards on the table there. But we are looking at how automation and AI can help us with our service. And that's not necessarily in terms of deciding the cases, but providing tools for our staff to work the cases through. If I can give a couple of examples. So, for example, when I arrived at the service a couple of years ago, we had about 100 people using Excel spreadsheets who were allocating cases out of our queue to individual caseworkers. Caseworkers would email Bob, can I have a new case? Bob would then look at the spreadsheet and email the case back through. We've automated that process now. So as we ingest the cases, we tag what... Bob has been retrained onto a call centre or as an investigator. No, it's been absolutely about giving people better work, some of this, which is, it was a thankless task Bob had, allocating these cases. But the point is what we're able to do through the tools is automatically get the case to the right person with a high degree of accuracy within a few minutes of that person requesting it, rather than waiting for it to come back. Similarly, we're looking at whether AI can help us review the documentation and summarise some of the documents. So, for example, on some of our insurance cases or our investment cases, we have hundreds and hundreds of pages of policy terms and conditions. The AI may be able to digest that a bit better and summarise it for our caseworkers and move the cases through more quickly.
That's very helpful.
Early stages, though, I must say, so these are thinking that we're doing at the moment. So I don't want to mislead the committee to say that we're doing this. The board is very passionate. I mean, the AI, there are pluses and there are disadvantages, but it's eyes on the casework that's important, and it's early stages, but it's a great opportunity and it's quite exciting because it lends itself to the kind of work that we do.
Of course, and may I, on AI, I would imagine the public would want to know that when it comes to the decision about their individual case, it's been looked at by a human being and understand the role of AI in it. So will you, in the FOS, keep the public updated about precisely what AI is and is not being used for?
Absolutely. We do that through our public notices, but we've also set up an AI governance board and an AI ethics board to make sure that we're taking independent views in, and that's part of our principle is transparency, so that people understand. But we're not deciding the cases using AI, we're using them as tools to help us process the cases more effectively.
And by disclosure to the public, what I mean, to be clear, is you say this is what AI is actually doing in physical step-by-step process.
Yeah.
Okay. One other question from me, just looking at the car loans overall, there's a lot of cooks and a lot of appeal routes in this world, isn't there? Because you've got common law, statute and FCA rules. The FCA will make a decision and then there's a potential for a judicial review all the way to the Supreme Court. You can make decisions and then you can be judicially reviewed. Court claims across 3 jurisdictions. Then there's a question of the collective redress schemes and the complex interaction of legal duties, time bar, and all the rest of it. Is your review of the FCA going nearly far enough, or do we actually need a root and branch review of how this is done? Because it's detrimental to consumers because they've got to wait ages for their decisions. It's very confusing. They've no idea what their rights are. I mean, if I was an investor in the United Kingdom, I'd say, well, I don't know where to start because I might, in good faith proceed in a certain way and find myself facing vast claims in the future. So you're both extremely experienced. You're coming to the end of your term, Baroness. It would be very interesting to have both your thoughts on whether this is just a mess that we need to start again on.
I think it's really important that we attract inward investment to the UK, really important for our economy and for the industry. And therefore, I passionately believe we need very clear and simple regulation and strong, effective consumer protections. I also believe passionately that the regulator is the regulator, and it's a matter for them and government in terms of what changes they would want to see to the regulator. And again, to stress the answer that I gave earlier, which is that I think, having simpler, straightforward regulator that is very clear for people and businesses, I think is of paramount of importance. But we are two very separate organisations. The Financial Conduct Authority is the regulator. We're an independent
I'm sorry to interrupt on
dispute.
that.
Sorry, I was just going to finish. Independent dispute resolution scheme, and it's really important that we maintain our independence and we don't get sucked into the regulator, because that's not our role. If the regulator sets the rules, they've got to be appropriate. All we can do when it's gone through the businesses, etc., is to see when we receive a case and the consumer is unhappy, to have a very evidence-based approach to that decision-making. And we need to maintain that independence and a separate Ombudsman office, so it doesn't get sucked up into all the
course,
FCA stuff.
And I understand the overall regulatory architecture. I suppose I'm just asking a very simple question. Is the system too complex, and is it working for consumers and businesses in your view?
I think it could be simplified is the answer that I'm giving. I think it could be significantly simplified, yes.
And Mr. Dipple-Johnstone, all your other regulatory experience,
Yes.
kind of yes and no question, is it working for consumers and businesses?
I would say you've got to drive confidence, and we could do it quicker. And I think that, for me, is the pace, is identifying particularly these mass claims events early on and getting a systemic response so people get the redress they need as quickly as possible. That will drive confidence and certainty. I think the system works very well for individual complaints and individual cases, but as they scale up into a sort of mass claim type issue, I think there's certainly more we can do, whether that's through PPI or the British Steel cases or now the Car Commission cases, to fix those systemic issues as quickly as possible.
Sorry, can I just sort of clarify? I understand, Baroness Manzoor, what you said about the distinct independence of the Ombudsman and the service you provide, and that's sort of critical for the consumer's confidence in it. But the caseload and the activities that you are essentially given to deal with is fundamentally conditioned by decisions of the FCA. So whilst you're not seeking to influence that, it must be the case, surely, that you're living with the consequences of historic decisions that are not brought to a clear conclusion. They generate patterns of demand and sifting challenges for your organisation. So surely you must get somewhat frustrated with the FCA at some point about the fact that they'll make a judgment and there'll be an ambiguity, and indeed there'll be an implication of an ambiguity for potentially other categories. Can more be done to assist you as an organisation to remove some of those uncertainties and give you a better sort of view of what you've got going forward? It seems to me that would be a positive thing that you would be interested in achieving.
Yes, that would be a positive indeed. I mean, the Financial Ombudsman Service is governed by some rules called DISP rules, which are jointly agreed between the FCA and the Financial Ombudsman Service. Those rules have not been reviewed for a very long time and can be open to interpretation. And that is one of the areas, as part of the call for input that we have, that we want to review. And in answer to one of other colleagues' questions regarding what would we like, I think the reality is there are some elements that may be parliamentary that will need to change, will need to be changed by statute. Others where we can move very quickly to modify and change those DISP rules in the way that we are operated, or indeed how we interpret, so there's much clarity about how those rules, what those rules say, and how we interpret them.
Can you tell us how long ago they were reviewed? Can you ballpark?
was it 2017, something like that? 2017, maybe something like that.
It's about that kind of vintage, which is why this is a great opportunity to look at the whole system. And as you say, the responsibility for the FCA and the firms to deal with issues up front, because nothing comes through to us until it's been
and just
dealt
to be
with by
clear,
the
they agreed between the FCA and the Financial Ombudsman Service. You mentioned Parliament. Would there be a need for legislation? Are you envisaging radical change?
Well, I'm always a great believer that, you know, if you need to make change to bring about the improvements, let's do it. I mean, what's the point?
So, but do you think there might be need for legislation? It's just that takes a different timetable completely once you start putting things.
Well, not everything needs.
I was just wondering,
but some things might.
So
depends on how radical we want to be. But I think we have the opportunity to be quite radical. Some of it will need legislation, but it doesn't all hang on legislation. There are quick wins, lots of very quick wins that we could do very quickly from the regulator and ourselves.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Dame Siobhan McDonald, MP.
Thank you. In 2000, I've been contacted on behalf of Paul Carlier, who's a whistleblower, and he says that in 2016 he submitted a claim to the Financial Ombudsman Service in which he provided evidence proving the unlawful and widespread use of the incentivised commission arrangements that are at the heart of what is now the car finance scandal. I mean, so that's 8-9 years ago. And I understand that he made a formal complaint to your service on the 31st of December 2024 about the Ombudsman's poor handling of his 2016 complaint. Are you aware of this complaint? Do you have any ideas about it? Do you know why his original complaint was refused?
So, individual case. A broad point you can make.
So just on the basis of those dates, I don't know the individual circumstances, but obviously and without knowing exactly which kind of commission agreement was in place, but obviously from our look at the cases, the discretionary commission model was banned in 2021, and we've then seen complaints coming through since then. I'd have to look at the individual case and respond separately, but certainly we would look at every case on what is known at the time the complaint is put. And we would determine it on the basis of the facts of what is known at that point. So,
the cases in this committee. So the general points.
It's the general point that a long time before 2024, 2025, there were people saying, "Hang on a minute, this is a problem." In which case, you've made a lot about you're making individual, you're undertaking inquiries into individual complaints. But if you see something that you know might come down the track and cost billions of pounds to compensate, what is your responsibility to inform the FCA? I know as an MP, when I do my advice surgery, I often know what's coming down the track for the council before they do. So I will go and see them and I'll say, this is an issue, can you have a look at it?
So yes, we do. We similarly have responsibilities to flag where we see issues that may give rise. For us, that is the challenge, is being able to identify from the individual case that this might cause a bigger concern. And often that is either through the volume we start to see and how quickly that builds up, which is why in the call for input we're very much looking at how do we identify mass claims earlier on in the process. We do a lot of work with representatives and with respondent firms to understand what they're seeing coming through, so we can understand if a short-term rise in what we're seeing is indicating a bigger problem, or whether it's just a short-term rise that will then tail off. That's part of the challenge of the system, but that's why it needs a system response.
And just very quickly, lastly, did the FCA at any time since 2016 put pressure on your service, indicate or direct you in respect as to how the FCA wanted to you to deal with unlawful incentivised commission arrangements?
No.
Thank you very much, Dame Siobhan. Just to be clear, we don't take up individual cases, but Dame Siobhan was obviously using that as an example to raise the wider point.
Sorry, can I just come back to that?
Ms. Baroness Manzoor.
The FCA have put a pause so that we can't investigate those. So that's not pressure, but yes, which means which is what we
Indeed. And then you've got 6,000 waiting on the books, or being actively worked on while they're waiting. Chris Coughlin, MP.
Baroness Manzoor, we've seen so far there's an awful lot going on. 40% increases in cases, the car finance scandal, fraud up 30%, and you've told us that your expectation, the board's expectation is that you'll have 90% of cases dealt with within 3 months, and actually you're at 44% right now. So why am I seeing a headcount cut of 5% on 2023 to 24?
So it's not, sorry if I misled it, it's 70% we're expecting to be undertaken in 3 months, and 90% within 6 months. I think going back to
looking... So that's almost from 40% right now, so you've almost got to double your performance.
Yes, so the reality is that we are a reactive organisation, sadly, in terms of the numbers of complaints that are coming to us. We want to work with value for money as well. We can't have people within the organisation that we have to have sufficient work within that. So the reality is that when I started, we had an independent commissioned review that took place. The cases that we had, the caseworkers that we had, could deal with any cases, and so therefore there were significant backlogs. We implemented vertical directorates, which were quite specific. To put it in NHS terms, if you're going to have heart surgery, then you had people who knew about heart surgery rather than the general practitioner that was going to do the heart surgery. And that has worked very well. It's worked very well for businesses, and it's worked very well for the organisation. And we had, of course, before that, a significant number of people that undertook, I think you asked a previous question about PPI or the levels of PPI, and some of these people were involved with PPI. We have refined our training and development for our caseworkers, and so we're moving upwards and onwards to make sure we've got the right skill base within the Ombudsman service. To the question that was asked by Mr. Grady, that have the technical expertise and experience that we're seeking as well. But I mean, James, do you want to?
If it helps to reassure you, last year we had about 2,700 colleagues. We'll end this year with around 3,300. We expect to grow again slightly next year. So we have been increasing resources, but I can send you the details in terms of our staffing. We've also been, as we've made efficiencies in our enabling services, been moving colleagues into casework from enabling services too.
Okay, and so you assume, so your expectation is that 73% will be met within 3 months?
In future years, we're not going to meet it this year though.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. But then why have you been cutting pay over your pay costs at a higher rate than you're cutting in headcount? Are you been reducing pay given the higher increase in caseloads and you're not meeting your performance standards right now?
I can send the detail, but we have been recruiting a lot of new people who join us at the bottom of our pay scale, so that might be a factor as part of that.
Sure, got you. And do you, are there areas where complaints are actually falling?
Yep, we are thankfully seeing some areas where we're seeing fewer complaints. So in some of our investment and pension products, we're seeing fewer complaints coming through. We're seeing some fewer insurance complaints coming through, and what we've been able to do is, through cross-skilling some of our colleagues, move those people onto areas of demand. But it does sadly take some time to retrain people to move across.
Sure, okay.
Could I just add that, the number of cases coming is not the success factor that we as a board look at. We look at, quality, turnaround times, timeliness, age profile, etc. That is the quality factor. We have to remember, despite the numbers of cases that are coming to us, our uphold rates, and we have to disaggregate the data yet and get a better diagnostics, which is to say, are we upholding complaints on substantive issues, where we really are saying to the banks or the insurance or anybody else, you've got this totally wrong and you need to do something else? Or are we upholding some of that on distress and convenience because it's kind of process driven a bit, rather it doesn't alter that. It's a bit of, sorry, they didn't do this, did a typo in your name or something like that. So if you look at our uphold rates over the years, they haven't significantly changed. So we're not seeing sudden, there may be differences in products. We mentioned, fraud and scams. So within the different directorates, there are some ups and downs. But overall, we're upholding about the same number of complaints, anything between 34 to I think 36 percent. Yeah, there or thereabouts. Okay. So we've got to be careful that we're not suggesting that we have major failings in our businesses, because again it goes to the point, we want to give confidence to the economy. But it's great that individuals and consumers and anybody else can come to the financial ombudsman and they know that their complaint will be held fairly, impartially and independently. But it also gives confidence to the businesses. We get, consumers don't think we don't do enough and businesses think we're a consumer champion, so I think we've got it right when we get hit on both sides. But the reality is, it is that confidence giving that is really important. So we've got to be very careful when we're talking about these numbers that we're not talking about a systemic problem with our businesses either.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Coggan. On to Rachel Blake, MP.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to start talking about authorised push payment fraud, something that it's awful when it happens to you. It can be really disabling and disempowering for people, and I think can be quite connected to worries that I certainly have about financial inclusion and confidence in using some of these products. In 2016, the Payment Systems Regulator became aware of this and established a voluntary scheme, which I understand got up to about a 73% claim rate. Since then, there's been a scheme that everybody has to support. What's happened to the number of complaints that have come to you for authorised push payment fraud?
Yes, absolutely. We recognise those challenges. In terms of what we've seen a rise in demand for the service in terms of APP fraud. What we're also seeing is more complexity coming through. So whereas previously we used to see maybe a single transfer, we now might see 2 or 3 transfers, including a cryptocurrency exchange, or through a family member, or through to a separate account. Year on year, it's about a 30% rise we've seen coming through. And we have a higher uphold rate in many of those cases. On some of the fraud and scams, it's mid 40% rather than the usual 37, 38%. And on some of the unauthorised, it's closer to 60% in terms of uphold rates.
Okay, I'm interested that you're getting more now that we have a compulsory scheme, because a compulsory scheme you would have thought would actually reduce your overall complaints. So what's gone wrong with the compulsory scheme?
I should just explain, we kind of see a bit of a delay between things changing and cases coming through. So okay. Obviously as the schemes come through in October of last year, people would have to have something go wrong. They would then have to make a complaint. That complaint would have to be dealt with. They would then have a period of time to bring them through to us. So we've seen relatively small, about 100 cases come through so far. But we'll obviously monitor the situation very closely to see how many cases are coming through.
So your argument is you think that that's a flow through from when the level of the incidents were increasing. Then we got to the 7th of October with the compulsory scheme, and you think it will tail off?
Well, we're watching it very carefully to see if it tails off, but we're also seeing other types of fraud that aren't covered by the scheme. So, if it's a failed investment type scam that isn't covered by the scheme, they might be impacted, and we might still see those coming through. Not all of the frauds and scams we see, I should explain, are covered by that scheme.
Could you tell us a bit more about the ones that aren't?
Yeah, I could absolutely write with all of the detail in terms of the different kinds, but they can be some investment schemes, some kind of card payments aren't covered, some kind of banking products aren't covered by that kind of scheme.
Okay, so how can we be confident that a scheme is robust? Who is monitoring the number of claims that are paid under the compulsory scheme? Because we've got your complaints going up, don't have full visibility at the moment about the number of claims that are being paid back by the payment services, how can we have confidence that there's fairness for consumers?
So my understanding is the PSR and the industry are monitoring the cases going through the scheme. I'm obviously happy to share with the committee anything we see in terms of the data going through. We did a lot of work in anticipation of the rule changes, so we are ourselves very interested in tracking what's coming through, how it's coming through, what kinds of issues people are complaining about, and I'd be happy to share what we've got with you.
Okay. It wasn't one of your top 5 complained about incidents last year. Is it? Where is it in your...
It's about half of our banking complaints now involve
so that would come in under...
fraud and scams is part of our banking casework.
Okay, we've got current accounts, credit cards, and then motor, and 3 categories of motor finance. So would it come under after that?
It's probably after that in terms of the volumes that we're seeing. So in terms of so far this year on APP, we've seen about 26,000 complaints coming through.
26,000. And are you resourced then if you're to cover those if you see the complaints going up and we don't have full visibility of the success of the compulsory scheme?
Yes, so we've done some retraining. We've moved people onto that. We've done 21,000 resolutions so far this year. So we're slightly behind where we'd want to be, but we'll be looking to catch up. And that's one of the areas where we're putting more resources into to free up particularly decision-making capacity to help customers through those cases.
And how are you communicating with the payment systems regulator about the compulsory scheme? Because if the compulsory scheme isn't working and it's not driving up that number of successful claims, you're going to see and the complexity of complaints is going to go up, and you may or may not be resourced to do it.
Absolutely. So we will be sharing information on the volumes we're seeing coming through. The team meet regularly with their counterparts there, but also in industry as well to share insight from what's coming through. We've done a lot of work in preparation for the rule change, holding workshops, explaining our approach, what we're expecting to see, and we'll continue to do that going forward.
And how long might a claim take? An ombudsman case on one of these take?
Well, we would aim to get through them as quickly as possible because people are obviously in quite distressed circumstances, having lost their money. But the same service standard would apply. That we would aim to get through 70% within 3 months of the case being received, and 90% within 6 months.
And do you have a breakdown of how these are being dealt with? Because the emotional experience of being defrauded in this situation is acute. And I think having confidence in pace. Do you have a breakdown of that?
I could write with you the details of that in terms of the APP fraud in particular.
The APP
Absolutely,
fraud in particular.
Could I just add, you asked earlier on regarding some of the changes. The consumer credit legislation is very outdated and it's very complex also. So we need to I think Parliament needs to look at that because it's outdated and I think there are moves to undertake some work in that area. But it's very complicated and complex for consumers because some areas are covered and some areas are not. Unless you're a really savvy consumer, you don't know what is covered by, fraud. So if you pay by, so how would you know? And the other thing, when you go to a bank, if you're an ordinary consumer or not, you go to a bank and it says you're regulated by the FCA. Not all activities that bank provides are regulated by the FCA. So it's almost sort of looking at these, what I call, educating the consumer in these events as well, but putting in the proper safeguards because that adds to the complexity of how we're expecting people to navigate. And if we had simpler navigation sort of trees, if you like, then that makes it's important so that the consumer not only has rights but has key responsibilities too, which of course is part of the FSMA Act as it currently stands. So yes, it's great that we've got the PSR doing some work, etc. But equally, there are some really important responsibilities that individuals have to safeguard and to shop around and clarity of legislation.
So are you saying the PSR hasn't kept up to speed with the fraudsters?
No, not at all. I'm saying that government needs to take an active interest to look at the consumer credit legislation that needs to be updated, and we need to go further to ensure that it's simplified, that all fraud and scams, wherever they happen, are actually come in line.
Right, I've got some questions to come back to on that, but John, did you?
Just to quickly pick up on the Consumer Credit Act, which is something that's been troubling me for some time, so agreement, it doesn't really cover all the modern methods of payment that are coming up. So I suspect what you're saying ultimately is it forms part of that picture that Mr. Glenn and I have been discussing of the need to have a root and branch review of how consumer finance is regulated.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you very much. Rachel Baker.
So just what I'm trying to get at is, how do we have confidence? You say that there needs to be a reform of the Consumer Credit Act. We know that the voluntary scheme got to about 73% of claims. What would be a reasonable number of claims to be approved by payment services?
Well, we should get none if it's working effectively, because, downstream...
You should get no complaints.
Well, we should get no complaints, because if the system is working, but no system is perfect. I mean, I always work towards the fact that we shouldn't have an Ombudsman service, not because it's not needed, but because it shouldn't exist, because, the regulations are very clear and the businesses are doing their role by, at the end of the day, it's their customers. They're not our customers. I often say to the chairman and the chief execs that I meet, these are your customers, not ours, and so therefore their service standards need to be, if they want to be competitive within the system, they need to be very good. So I'm just adding to that sentiment. But yes, I would like to think that we receive no complaints about fraud and scams. But sadly, the reality is that the UK seems to be a magnet for significant amounts of fraud and scams, and as James has already said, that they're getting more and more complicated, and so we've got to get better at it, and that includes the fraud scam, includes the Home Office, includes the regulators, it includes everybody else. So it's not a single solution, but we are at the end of all of this, and so I'm suggesting that we are proactive, but perhaps some of our legislation which is outdated can be simplified and so that everything comes into to focus and can be addressed.
Yeah. There's a bit more information that would be useful to know about the claims. Are there any particular category of payment service that are coming forward in complaints to the Ombudsman?
There's no category of payment service to single out. We do publish details in terms of which companies we're getting stuff through and what the uphold rate. And what we tend to see is where something bubbles up, we try to identify what the issue is, share that learning quickly, engage with the sector to share that learning. But obviously the complexity means it takes a little bit longer each time to get back through. But
specifically on the authorised push payments, are there any types of provider that are bubbling up? There's
nobody I'd like to single out individually. They all rise and fall depending on sort of what's going on within the particular company. But I can write with all of the details if that'd be helpful. Maybe the top 10 with a breakdown.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. I think Mr. Bobby Dean just wants to come in briefly, and then
Thank you, Baroness Manzoor. You made quite a shocking statement there. You said the UK is a magnet for frauds and scams. Is that based on an international comparison of sorts? Are we much worse than others? Do you know of any international comparisons that we can look at?
Well, I think it's not a shocking actually statement. It's shocking in the sense that that we have perhaps it's easier because of push payments that we had that enable things to be made easier. For instance, banks have told me that, if it's your money, there are consumers that say it's my money and we want to send it now, and they had a certain period of time to send that money wherever it went. I think it's really important that friction is added. By friction, I mean delay.
My point, if I may, is just: are we worse than other countries, other European countries?
I think some of the figures. I haven't seen any latest figures, but the last figures that I saw, it seemed that yes, in Europe we appear to be we have a significant number of fraud and scams in this country. Yes.
Right, thank you.
Dame Siobhan McDonald.
This causes so much distress to so many constituents and is a great driver in the use of cash and the need for face-to-face banking because people are so terrified of being scammed. And I just want to fully understand some of the rules. Where somebody is scammed by being told that their account is unsafe, and the person on the phone principally sets up a new account for them in their name, gives them the details, they make a test payment, then they put more money in. So a kind of safe scam. Are people covered when they make complaints to you about that? Because they have the account's in their name and they, to a certain extent, have control over it, but somebody else has set it up for them for a fraudulent reason.
Yeah, very sadly, we see a wide variety of different scam types coming through to us, including complaints of that type. Similarly, we get complaints where somebody's had their credit card or their payment card and their PIN compromised, and somebody's then gone to the cash point and cleared their bank account. So people who've purchased things online and the products haven't been delivered. We see a wide variety of different frauds and scams coming through, and we can look at all of those.
Yeah, so you wouldn't pick hairs, split hairs on that
No,
particular one?
we would look at, because that's the benefit of an Ombudsman scheme, we have a fair and reasonable basis for the circumstances the individual consumer finds themselves in.
Yeah.
But we have to make sure, sorry, I have to say, we have to make sure as well that the consumer themselves have some responsibility and ensure that they too, in terms of that they follow, when the banks are contacting them and so forth. I mean, when you're scammed, I mean, it's very regrettable and it's very sad and it's appalling. I've seen the distress that causes some people, and that is very, very unfortunate. At the same time, I would say to any consumers is, go with, sending money with caution, bring your bank up personally, make sure that you read what somebody's saying, don't go with the emotional view. Those are some of the things that you can say, I'm talking about perhaps like romance scams, and scams like that, which happen on a much more regular basis than you think.
But the decline in bank branches accelerates that, because I know the banks in Mitcham Town Centre were forever chatting to customers who they knew to say, please don't send this money, they're ripping you off. But now people don't have that same access, very vulnerable people. And let's be absolutely clear, we assume it's all older people, and that is not the case at all. Lots of younger people get scammed as well.
Oh yes, absolutely. And the internet plays, and that comes back to looking at legislation. Exactly what's happening on the internet and social media. I'm an old person by anyone's, but the reality is, that tweeting or all these other different platforms that are around, what is Parliament doing to regulate those aspects of selling or mis-selling or misrepresentation? And I think, we need to go faster and further in that arena too.
Yeah, unwittingly given a trailer to our inquiry on finfluencers.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No. We obviously aren't thinking along the same lines. James Siobhan.
In the term, again, it has to be a fraudulent or dishonest act or course of conduct to manipulate, deceive or persuade a consumer into transferring funds. Most scams are never passed to the police or to any other regulatory basis. So do you have a very... do you require that or require it to be investigated in order to say, well, yes, that is dishonest, deceitful?
No, we will look on a fair and reasonable basis on the circumstances the complaint has put. We would obviously encourage people to report to action fraud and to the police as quickly as possible, because that helps the system overall learn what's going on. But we wouldn't make it a requirement of our service to complain to the police first.
And there's an upper limit of £85,000.
Under the no-fault scheme, yes.
And so that's another interesting thing. So the PSR's upper limit is 85. Our upper limit is 415, is it now? 450. Sorry, 400. It's just gone up recently. 430,000. So if I go to the business and the upper limit is 85, and they'll say if you lose 85,000, if you lose 100,000, let's say. And so there will be this view that, yes, 85 you can have back if they agree that you have been frauded. But you can come to our service and we can go up to 430,000. Now, that's what I mean about regulations being joined up, because it seems, for me as a consumer, well, I can go there at 85, but then I can come to you and I can get 430. So why aren't you 85 as well? What difference does it make? We don't get many complaints up to that level, but that's not the point. The point is, we need that joined up thinking of what level it should be. In my personal view, and thank you to the chair, as this may be my last appearance, it's really important that there is consistency in terms of, what we're setting out, whether it's call for input or the wider regulatory system. But again, even though we don't get many complaints at that level, it's really important that consumers are aware of it's 85, but then there's duplication of effort and duplication of time between businesses and ourselves. I don't think we've had many cases. I think we've had very few.
At the upper level, but we do get some.
Yeah. And why do we need an upper level? Because the reality is, if you've been frauded out, whether it's £1 million or whether it's £1, and you feel affected by that, and you can be affected, it's not the amount, different, why is that important?
No upper limit.
Yeah, why not? Why if you've been frauded out of £1 million, or you've been frauded out of £1, and that could be systemic, and we want to root out problems in the system, then why does it matter? Surely the definition of what fraud and scam is really important, and what the consumer did or didn't do, and that goes back to the consumer accountability. I mean, if they ignored all the warnings of the businesses, they've ignored all the kind of issues, and they still go ahead and send money off, then why should the bank or business be held accountable? Equally, why should the consumer, if they've lost, whatever sum of money, should be held accountable if the banks have got it wrong?
Yeah. Okay, thank you, very clear. Thank you, Dame Siobhan. John Glenn MP.
Great. Can we turn to the issue of growth?
Yeah.
It's obviously highly topical, and I think in the Mansion House speech the Chancellor said that Treasury have been working closely with the FSA and the FOS to develop a new agreement. I thought when Dame Harriet Baldwin asked you earlier about direct contact with the FOS, you said you hadn't had direct contact. I just wonder, given your significant experience dealing with businesses, and what do they say to you? We'll come on to the consumer side as well. I mean, what do they say to you about what needs to change in terms of the rules to allow more growth to come from their industry? Because what's been put to me is that in, for example, the sort of subprime retail SME, an important sector, higher cost lending, but one we need to have, that people aren't investing because there's, the options to go back over lending decisions, advice given over many years back. There's 8% interest levied on the sum borrowed. And it is chilling investment in those sectors. Do you recognise that depiction of the sort of chilling effect of the rules as they are at the moment? And in the context of what the government's trying to do with growth, what would you suggest happens to change things?
I think there isn't much that I would disagree with what you've articulated there. I think it's quite right that we look at the 8%, because businesses have mentioned that. We've had the responses to the call for input, and we're going through the views of what businesses and others are saying to us about what needs to change. I recognise that the issue that they want simplicity in terms of regulation, and simplicity and clarity about interpretation of what the rules mean for them, and indeed how we deal with cases thereafter as well. I think they would want to see what they have said is less regulation, but more effective regulation. But of course that's not a matter for the Financial Ombudsman Service. That is a matter for the FCA and others. But you asked me what businesses say to me. They also say that we have not got to be, and you'll have heard this, a quasi-regulator through the decision making that we do on our casework, and we take that very seriously. I have asked all chairmen and chief execs, if there is any concerns, to write to me directly on any particular issues that they are concerned about. I haven't received one letter in connection with that, but I recognise where there is a gap and we have to decide on particular cases, on the merits of that case. Then when you have principle-based regulation, then that is difficulty, because they don't have the clarity. They're looking for tram lines of, this is what you want us to do, this is from either government or the FCA, this is what we've done, but then perhaps, the interpretation isn't clear perhaps for them, and there's a different interpretation, and you're coming along and perhaps interpreting it differently. So that clarity within the system, I think, is very important.
But in the principle base, we had the chief executive of the FCA, as you would have anticipated, come here a few months ago probably. And, he drew out the distinction between a US model where, it's very rules-based, and you basically, crudely, they get on with it more quickly, but if they don't get it right 6 months later, they come down very hard on them. We have this principle-based thing, which generally is seen as a virtue. But in your experience, the ambiguity of the interpretation of those principles surely has a chilling effect on business. It doesn't actually work out very well, does it?
Well, I think it depends which business you're talking about. But of course, when you have a lot of regulation or you're over-regulated, then of course investors will perhaps move to areas where there is not the same type of regulation. And so it's very important that we attract that inward investment into the UK by not being seen as an over-regulated and uncompetitive industry. So yes, I agree with that sentiment.
And if I can just, I'm going to pass over to my colleague in 1 second, but can I just ask about this, the effect of this ongoing uncertainty on the car finance? And the government, the Treasury has talked about the need for proportionate compensation, but presumably the uncertainties there will also have a negative effect on the number of companies that are prepared to get involved in car financing.
Yes.
Do you recognise that?
Well, I think wherever there's greater risk and you are open to different interpretation, if I was a business and small to medium-sized businesses, of course you would think very carefully as to which areas that you would want to invest in. And that's why I think, there needs to be clarity in terms of the roles and responsibilities of regulators, wherever they are, whether it's in the finance sector or indeed in the National Health Service, which is another area that I'm very familiar with.
Of course.
I don't think, in my personal experience, over-regulation and a lack of clarity, ambiguity, is not the best way forward for investors. And I think organisations and government are working very hard, as you were in your time as Secretary to the Treasury and as EST, to ensure that we do have that competitiveness and that growth agenda in our economy. And I'm absolutely delighted that the government are pursuing that agenda because it's in the interest of not only UK PLC, but each one of us individually too.
And just my final question then is, can you just sort of clarify what's happening between yourselves and the FCA in terms of an input to the government, the Chancellor's sort of process of review? What is actually happening? Can you tell us?
Yes, so I very much supported the Chancellor's statement, and I think she's absolutely right and moving forward on that. What we have done with Treasury support, we have gone out for call for input, which is this consultation that we have put out with lots of questions, very open questions, to see what they would like businesses and indeed anybody else, and I've offered the opportunity for the Select Committee also to feed in should they wish. That consultation publicly closed at the end of January. And we are going through those responses with the FCA. I am interested to hear what the FCA's plans are regarding the call for input from their perspective as well, but it's a joint call for input. I and the board, my board and my leadership team are very clear in terms of what our expectations are for the Ombudsman service. But we will look at the responses very carefully. I don't suspect there will be something significantly new in terms of what have been said and we've known about for some time. I understand the government. You probably know the next steps, really.
Yeah. So our intention is to bring forward detailed proposals as part of a consultation on disparate changes in June. So that's our next target. There'll be some things that we can do quicker, which are just about the ways that we work, which we'd like to get on with, having listened to the views. But the next formal stage is at the mid-year point. We'll be setting out the proposals we're taking forward. If there's anything that needs legislation, that might be, as you alluded to, might be a longer term thing.
Let's do something radical, guys. Why not? Because if we don't, what's the point? Really.
People, Baroness Manzoor, on their last visit to the committee, because that's exactly what you think.
Thank you.
Well, yeah.
Thank you very much. To continue on this theme, Dr. Jeevan Sander, MP.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was wondering, what do you guys see your role as in terms of enforcing competitive markets and indeed growth in the broader scheme of things?
Look, we are a complaints handling body, and our role is to look at the complaints from consumers that come to us, and we need to do that well, and we need to be operationally fit for purpose, and that's what the board and the leadership team are working towards. We need to improve our turnaround times, we need to ensure that we're giving an excellent service and we maintain those standards, and we embrace new technology to aid and help and support the very many committed staff that we have working within the organisation. That is our remit. We are set up by statute. We're governed by FSMA, the Financial and Markets Act, which was updated in 2023, and we will continue to do that. Some of the views that you have heard from me are generic views in terms of regulation and how we may make the system work better. But our remit and our purpose must be to ensure we're an independent, fit-for-purpose, modern, accessible Ombudsman service.
So greater enforcement on your side means greater clarity of rules by which everybody operates, which means, to our mind, a more competitive industries and growth. Would that be a fair summation of where you are, or what your view of yourself is?
Well, yes, I think that
I would probably add confidence within that. Confidence that if something does go wrong, there is an ombudsman there that can help you put it right.
And if you're doing your job correctly, would you expect then to see fewer claims, i.e. the business reacts proactively to what you're doing if there's less claims on your side?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like any ombudsman, we would like to see fewer cases coming through to us because they could be resolved at local stages. But also with the mass claims piece, that's absolutely where the system as a whole can really learn to get things put right for us.
And then within the growth strategy as a whole then, so your message for today is tougher action on your side will help create more growth. Is that a fair summation of your view?
No, that's not quite what we said. Not tougher action on our. We can only review the cases on the evidence before us, and we can only give the outcomes in related to those individual cases, and that's what we're set up to do. We're not set up, but a byproduct of having an independent, strong, effective Ombudsman service is important because it gives confidence to investors and others, and particularly consumers, that and at the end of the day they're the ones that buy the products and the services of our financial industry, that if something goes wrong they have some, it's not going to be dealt with by the regulator, it's going to be dealt by an independent organisation. And I think, that would and should give confidence as well to investors if they're not marred up with what they would see sometimes as red tape. And we need to remove some of the bureaucracy that exists in the system.
Okay. In the interest, Chair, I'm happy to hand over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sander. Ewan Yang, MP.
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions around debt collection and also about how FOS deals with vulnerable customers. So firstly, on debt collection, I note that before the pandemic you warned, or your organisation warned, about aggressive customer service tactics and breaches of confidentiality from some financial firms. I was wondering, given the impact of...
So sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
Yes, it is very... We've been trying to quieten it down.
Sorry, I was just saying that before the pandemic, your organisation warned about aggressive customer service tactics in debt collection and sometimes breaches of confidentiality from debt collectors. Given the pandemic has left many more indebted, what has been the trend over the last few years on debt collection?
So we've continued to see complaints, as you describe, but also administration. But mainly in the credit space, it's been about affordability. So it's whether the debt was affordable in the first place. That's the most significant type. And the growing type of complaint that we're seeing coming through.
And it's, in terms of the tactics for debt collectors and for bailiffs, for example, do those kinds of complaints come to you? And is there any trend that you're seeing pre-pandemic to now?
I'm not aware of any trend we're seeing, but we do get complaints about debt management companies and debt collection, yes.
I was wondering, in terms of the data that you collect, both in terms of debt collection, but also APP fraud and various other scams that you're dealing with, do you collect data on the protected characteristics of complainants and on other demographic data to help understand which groups are at more systemic risk from this kind of abuse?
We haven't historically, but we are going forward. That's one of the changes we've been putting in place to be able to get better insight out of the cases that we're seeing. But we haven't historically, but we are going forward.
Could you say a bit more about what will change going forward and what's led to that change?
So part of what's led to that change has been us wanting to have better insight in terms of who's complaining, who's using the service, how we're determining cases, and making sure that our service is accessible for all. And part of that has been about the value of the data, being able to share back with industry and the regulator what's coming through the complaints process.
That's great to hear. When will that start happening, and will you publish this for all to see as well?
So we will be publishing our data because it's part of our data set, but obviously we have to collect it in first, so as we start to collect it over the coming year, we'll be able to share that with you more.
I think the data is one issue, absolutely, and we do need clarity of who's coming, why they're coming. They're not all sort of, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be derogatory, but, they're not all wild middle class sort of, old men that got lots of time. That's not the case. We need to make sure we're reaching out to all communities with greater diversity so that we can ensure that everyone receives that free service that we offer and that no one gets, the capped off from organisations such as CMCs that, in terms of vulnerability, we have a very good programme of training and development for all our caseworkers to ensure that they understand, vulnerability comes in different forms for consumers. I've recently, last year, had someone that's very eminent who had been frauded out of significant sums of money. He was a nervous wreck. He was a national speaker. He just couldn't deal with it. He felt he'd been stupid and all of those things that sap your confidence in this. So for me, vulnerability is you are vulnerable to that particular situation. But I know James and the leadership team have put in a good system of ensuring that caseworkers are trained effectively to better understand and recognise vulnerabilities and address them accordingly as best as we can.
Thank you. And on the point of that training, I wanted to ask about economic abuse, particularly domestic abuse and financial abuse. And the FCA, for example, recommends that financial firms have specialist teams dealing with this kind of abuse. I was wondering if the FOS also has your own in-house specialist teams.
We do, yes, and we've had good links in with Surviving Economic Abuse and other charities working in that space. As Baroness Manzoor has explained, we've recently put all 2,000 caseworkers through refresher training through the Money Advice Trust on vulnerability. We've introduced a new vulnerability recording system. We also have what we call our Supporting Our Customers practice group, which is colleagues who have additional training and experience and skills who work on priority cases with people who are especially vulnerable. And we have an additional support network, similarly also helping customers.
Thank you. Do you have your own in-house team dealing with this kind of abuse?
We have specialists and people who focus on those, and they will review the decisions before they go out the doors, but they're not just dealing with that kind of case, so they'll be dealing with a wide range of case, but if a case raises that issue, then their colleagues can refer to them to get some advice.
And those specialists that you have in-house, are they trained to deal with economic abuse in domestic abuse cases?
So they will have had some training, yes, to support them, and we've had close links, but I can write with the details if that would be helpful in terms of what they do. Yeah, happy to.
Thank you. That's all, Chair.
Thank you. Lots more we could go into here, but we're in this bit in the interest of time, Bobby Dean, MP, over to you.
Spoken a bit about the principles of the reforms that you put forward in the joint call for input with FCA. I want to try and rattle through some of the specific reforms proposed, if that's okay. The first one being the removal of the option to appeal to an ombudsman. How many or what proportion of appeals are currently overturned by an ombudsman?
So we want a wide range of views. We're not saying this should happen, we just want views. At the moment, about 17-8% of our cases go through to an ombudsman decision. And in terms of those decisions themselves, it's a similar percentage, about 18-19%, where we actually get a different outcome.
18-19%.
But it varies product by product. So
Yeah.
some products will be at that level. Some products, for example, on some of our affordability cases where we've had a long-standing approach, it's sort of single-figure overturn rates.
Okay, so you said 7 or 8 and then 18 or 19, is that what you said?
For some of the products,
so
yeah.
fewer than one, okay, great.
Yeah.
And then, do you have an estimate for how many of these would not be able to be heard under the new rules?
Well, it depends on the framing of the rules and if that's something that we put forward. So
for
we
instance,
could, for example,
yeah.
So we could, for example, look at a subset so where there's new evidence has come forward, or whether there's a new area of complaint, or we could just continue the present system. So we've not got to the point of doing estimates of what the impact would be.
But
could I just add to that? I mean, from an external point in, nobody thinks, oh, we've got a two-stage process and what it means. When somebody writes to us, there's a complaint, they want it to be dealt with, quickly and informally and so forth. This is an internal process that's been built up over the years. And so, we could do this. This is one of the quick wins we were talking about, which is, over, 80% of our, the views that we have are actually not, they're fair and so we've got to...
So the purpose of my question is, because there is a proposal about only allowing people to go to an ombudsman if they present new evidence or if there's a factual inaccuracy. And I'm trying to work out how many cases would therefore fall by the wayside if that was to be the rule. So what percentage of cases would you estimate would not be able to pass that threshold?
We haven't worked through those estimates yet because we've not moved on to that stage of the process. We just want views. That was one of the issues that was raised with this.
But can I just add to that? That's an important point, actually, because we do have consumers that come in again and again and again and think that, you've not listened to them when, the investigations are being fair and reasonable and they just don't like the outcome. And so there has to be a point, unless you have, new evidence, and this is my view, if you've got new evidence or the Ombudsman Service has got something totally factually wrong, then I think as a part of natural justice that, you do go to the Ombudsman. But I think at the moment that the issue is that every consumer has the right to go to the Ombudsman, even though they've gone through the first stage. And yet the overturn rate at that second stage is so nominal, and so therefore the advantages to the consumer are not that great. So the numbers are not going to be great, and it's not going to be any different because obviously factually we've not got it right. Yeah. We do have a very comprehensive system in place which checks, after we've undertaken a case. I mean, perhaps you could say a few words around that.
Yeah, we do have a peer review process, but we're never infallible, so it's always there as something we're mindful of. We want to get the right answers for people.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've got more reforms, so I'm going to stab it.
Sure,
I think the central concern of that would just be when people go to an ombudsman, they expect the decision to be heard by an ombudsman, but they're not always going to be, and you might be reducing the number of people who get to access that. So we've also got the two-stage complaints process. I think you say in your documentation that it was abolished in 2011 due to the abuse by firms of it. They basically had an incentive to not deal with a complaint properly on the basis that most people won't follow up. And you've also said that you don't see any strong arguments for that to change. Why is it being proposed this time then?
Because we want a wide range of views. So these are things that we hear people's concerns about, and we want to get as wide a range.
When you say people, it's a firm concern.
Firms and consumer groups, in terms of they feel they've not been heard properly by the business they've complained about. So, for example, in the information rights space, it's not unusual to have an internal review before you then go to the next tier. So we wanted as wide a range of views as possible. So we've put a number of proposals out there to garner views in. You could equally say lots of people want their case resolved as quickly as possible. So more stages might add more delay. So we just want to balance those views.
Okay, I'm going to keep rattling through. Claims management companies. I was struck actually, Baroness Manzoor, earlier when you spoke about claims management companies. You seem to have a fairly negative view of them, actually. You said that they look for windows of opportunity, sometimes are looking to exploit. So what proportion of claims management company claims do you think are meritless? Do you have an estimate on that?
Well, actually, I said there are some very good claims management
you
companies.
You did, but the overall title was...
No, so let me correct that. There are, some very good claims management companies, and just to restate that.
So what's the proportion of the bad ones?
Well, I think when you look at our numbers and you look at our uphold rates, if you think that, 47%, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, James, but there or thereabouts, of our casework from April to December last year was from claims management companies. And then if you look at the uphold rate of the cases, which is where we found issues, that is significantly lower where we found a problem than it is if consumers came to us directly, where the uphold rate was around about, I think, 37%. So a big difference compared to, and when you say negative, of course, I'm always concerned where there is a free service, an accessible, simple service that, consumers should have a right and do have the right to come to us directly. Many of these claims management companies go out recruiting people. It's kind of like windfall. They cherry pick. It's not a consumer saying, "I need your help."
Okay.
There may be some, but I
you're
don't know.
You're saying many. So you're saying that the proportion that are bad are in the majority, because you're saying many.
Well, when we have, James can answer this question. I can see him just thinking, "Oh gosh, what's my chairman going to say here?" But the reality is, we do have. Some. I can think of one, but
is it some or many? I'm trying to get at the proportion.
Well, let me give you an example, because I think it's important. Without giving the company's name, we had a CMC that had around 2,500 cases. They went to this small business and said, deal with them. Clearly, that sort of volume of cases where, not evidence-based, not fully worked-up cases, etc. Some of them perhaps cut and pasted from other... they landed it on this small business. The reality is they couldn't deal with those cases within. They don't have the staff. And what did that particular CMC do? They brought it to the Ombudsman service. And some of those consumers will not even know that they have a complaint with the Ombudsman service.
I understand the problem you're trying to outline.
I'm going to hand over, because I don't know the exact figure.
If I can ask a follow-up question before then, just because I'm going to get to the point sooner if I can, which is, if it is some, it would seem to me more sensible the remedy is to be reporting these bad operators to the SRA and get them dealt with accordingly.
Well,
if it is majority, then maybe we do need to look at wider reform. So can you give me a sense of what's your engagement with the SRA when you report the bad firms, or is there just too many of them?
So we refer to the SRA, we refer to the FCA for firms that are registered with the FCA. We also refer to the Bar Standards Board, because we've seen some firms move through a process of arbitrage to different regulators. The uphold rate for represented cases is about 28% across the period Baroness Manzoor was describing, which is lower than people coming to us direct achieve, around 37-38%. We see a mixed bag of practice. We see a number of firms operating at scale at the upper end, where they send us many thousands of cases in very short order. We also see some representatives who are really high quality, operating in some specialist areas of claims management. We see some solicitors who advocate on family matters, and they have for many years, and we have really good quality outcomes from those cases. But what we want to do is have a fairer funding model, and what we want also is to encourage the due diligence from the cases we've already looked at, so that firms select cases that are more likely to win rather than just send in speculative cases.
Yeah, because the proposal is a £250 fee, which I guess you're assuming will eliminate this behaviour. It could also impact on the claims management company industry as well. And I guess the question about proportion is crucial, because if you might end up damaging the CMC industry overall and therefore damaging consumers' ways of holding financial firms to account, when you could have just rooted out the rogue operators, then wouldn't that be a better outcome?
Can I just say that, there are 10, all CMCs have 10 free cases, and that covers 82% or thereabouts of CMCs in the business. So the reality is that most will still be covered, but they will ensure that the cases that they bring to the Ombudsman service are done with appropriate documentation, etc. We've been talking about fraud and scams. Why would we expect a lesser standard from others when we want to look at the evidence? We're an evidence-based organisation. And I think it's 92% of people, in terms of from vulnerability that was asked from colleague across the way from Ms. Yang, is that they come directly to the Ombudsman service, not through CMCs. So I think we have to bear that in mind. And as we said, that there is a real impact on business, where we haven't discussed, which is when they flood, some of them, with thousands of complaints to businesses. They themselves can be put out of rate, not because of just they have to still pay us £650 for our fee. That's just the way that the polluter pay principle works. So that 2,500 complaints I was talking about earlier would attract a bill of what? Sorry, my maths is not very good, but what would it be? £650 times by 2,500. Now that itself, it goes into to the point that Mr. Glenn was making, which is, well, we want a vibrant, small to medium-sized businesses, but where CMCs act, some CMCs act in that way, it can put those businesses out. And that reduces the number of organisations that are out there to provide other very effective services that they may well be providing, those companies may be providing. So we need to take that into consideration.
One final specific reform point, if I can. I mean, just on the CMC, I think that some consumers will see them as a lifeline because they're time poor and they don't have the legal expertise to match up against the might of the financial industry that they're coming up against. So I think it's just important to say that. And this is perhaps an example of it. They're also looking to dismiss collective complaints on what is called failed investments. I've heard people complain that this is sort of bank lobby speak for investment fraud, and they want to call it failed investments because that reduces their liabilities. Do you have any concerns about this as well, about failed investments being mistaken for failed for investment fraud?
So here we also hear them defined as civil disputes or as scams, and some of them are just scams, frankly. So what we would like is to focus on cases that we can resolve, and there are some categories of cases in this space which frankly are being investigated by organisations like the FBI or the Serious Fraud Office or law enforcement. They are not necessarily amenable to a lay ombudsman service to be investigating alongside those kind of law enforcement agencies. So we want to make sure that we've got the cases that we can actually determine and help, rather than trying to do the job of other agencies, given the complexity of some of those cases.
The bar for a law enforcement agency is going to be extremely high, though. And would it not support an investigation if FOS was to make a verdict on those cases too?
Well, it's where we can make a verdict. I can't request information from overseas. I can't get that kind of material. We are not that kind of investigative body. We want to make sure that we can focus on those cases as our statutory purpose, as an informal alternative to the courts, rather than as a law enforcement agency.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Dean, for that. Can I thank our witnesses very much indeed. Today we've heard a lot about Abby Thomas's departure from the Financial Ombudsman Service, and we were told repeatedly, Baroness Manzoor, by you, that it was a mutual decision. And we also heard from you that Ms Thomas is not subject to a non-disclosure agreement. You did refuse to tell us, Baroness Manzoor, about Abby Thomas's settlement or severance payment, whatever we want to call it, despite the fact that it will be published in your accounts in due course. You did agree to write to us about this. Can you confirm when you would get us a letter on that?
As soon as I'm able to do so.
Okay, thank you. So we also heard some interesting points about the future of the system, particularly around authorised push payment fraud claims, when we were just delving into the detail there with Ms Blake. that they were still increasing rapidly and were very complex, and we don't yet know really what the impact of the new scheme will be. And we also heard from you, Baroness Manzoor, that it's really important that consumer compensation thresholds should be consistent between the Financial Ombudsman Service, the Financial Conduct Authority and Fraud Reimbursement Scheme. And you also said, I think, one of the things at a moment in the room when you said there should not be a limit for consumer redress. So can I just confirm, is that your personal opinion or is that an official position from the Financial Ombudsman Service?
No, that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, just
fraud is fraud.
Yeah, just wanted to make it clear because it might be your last time in front of us. So can I thank you both very much indeed. That's Baroness Manzoor, the Chair of the Financial Ombudsman Service, and James Dipple-Johnstone, who's the Interim Chief Ombudsman. The transcript of this session will be available on the website, uncorrected, in the next couple of days, with thanks to our colleagues at Hansard. Thank you very much indeed. Order, order.